This is the first of the lectures that's related to the concept of success. There's also going to be another video related to the same topic, and then you are going to read The Mundanity of Excellence. The second video is also going to introduce that article. So you're going to spend 3 days specifically focusing on the idea of success. So the first thing we're going to talk about is building off Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers. So Malcolm Gladwell is a popular figure. He's been a best-selling author. He's hosted lots of talks. He's appeared on TV shows. He has an incredibly successful podcast. And really what he's done so successfully is take ideas from sociology and from psychology, and then he repackages them in an accessible manner. So he takes it from an academic journal, which is usually pretty dry, usually pretty technical, and he does a very good job of saying, hey, here's the hook, here's what should get you interested. Or even more often what he likes to do is say, here's something that you would think is true, but here's what's really going on. And because of this, like I was saying, he has numerous best-selling books, and I would argue he's one of the most influential writers of nonfiction in the last 30 years. Some of his books are Blink, The Tipping Point, Outliers. There was this funny thing when Gucci Mane first got released from prison. He was carrying this book, and he said, this was my favorite book. And then Malcolm Gladwell saw it and said, wow, that's amazing. Gucci Mane loves my book. And they ended up having an event together. Just a side note that really doesn't matter at all. But if you search for that online, you're going to see Gucci Mane carrying, I think it was The Tipping Point. Maybe it was Outliers. It was one of those two books, carrying them around. Anyway, introduction of Outliers. So these chapters, again, they're pretty accessible. I think you're going to enjoy reading them. I've even had students ask me after reading the first few chapters if I can make a PDF of the book available or lend them one of my copies, because I have a few copies of this book. If you're interested in reading more, happy to share it with you. But he does what Malcolm Gladwell always does. He starts off with a question, and then the answer that you would expect to give, or would you expect to be true, is not the actual correct answer. So in this case, he says, let's start with the Roseto mystery. Roseto is a town in Pennsylvania. I think I looked it up, and it's about 6 hours from here. So it's pretty good drive. Maybe it's a little bit less than that, but relatively ruralish area. And there's a mystery, right? So in the 1950s, this physician from the University of Oklahoma, and I'm really just guiding you through the chapter. So again, if you just read the chapter and you got all the details, you probably could skim through this, but it's maybe worth paying attention just as I highlight what I think is so important. So, University of Oklahoma physician visits a town, and what he finds, as you read in the book, are that people are dying of heart disease at a much lower rate than you would expect. This is the number one killer, as Gladwell talks about. This is the number one killer of people at the time. And yet here you find these unexpectedly low rates. So here's the simple puzzle. And so the physician tries to figure out what's going on. Worth noting that the medical doctor brings in a team of sociologists to help him gather data, right? So we can see the intersection between health and sociology. So they start with the things you would expect. It's not about diet, right? Because they're not eating anything particularly healthy or particularly different than the surrounding areas. It's not like they're subscribing to what we now call the Mediterranean diet, which we know is high in legumes or beans and vegetables and fish and olive oil. They're not doing that, right? They're eating a standard American, Northeastern, and I say American quotations, but they're eating a standard diet that you would expect of that region. It's not about exercise. They move some and other people move less, but it's pretty ordinary for people of the time, nothing special. And it's not about genetic luck, because if you look at who is in the area, there's also people with the same genetic makeup in other areas, and they have high rates of heart disease. So what they find, and actually even as a side note, think about the questions you get when you go to a doctor. What do they ask you when they're trying to get a general assessment of your health? They ask about genetics through saying, what is the health history of your family? They ask about what type of food you're eating. They might ask about what type of exercise you're getting. They would ask about how much sleep you're getting. So they would ask all these things that are very much at the individual level. Those are the answers you expect with health, but it doesn't answer this mystery. So what is this answer? What is the answer they find? Well, they find something that I, even as a sociologist, find incredibly fascinating and surprising. It's because the people are incredibly social. They have a healthy community. People help each other out. There aren't those intense divisions that you see in other places. There's not unnecessary stress and inequalities, right? There's a general sense of living a good life. And as a result, we see this incredible drop in heart disease. This is an inherently sociological finding, right? The answer isn't simply at the level of the individual. It would be like the doctor asking you when you go to get your health checkup, including a question about how stressed you are, which would be at the individual level, but then expanding out. How well do you know your neighbors? Do you feel like you're part of a community? Do you feel like you have a network of people around you would help you, even if they're not their completely close friends, right? How much security do you have in your housing? Those would actually be really useful questions that we would add to get at health outcomes. And so then the question becomes, why does Gladwell start the book using this example? Well, he starts it because he wants to do with success what this particular case or example does with health, saying taking something that we see at the individual level and expanding our understanding of it to include all the factors that allow someone to be, instead of healthy, someone to be successful or not successful. And then he says, which I also find interesting, I'm going to call the book Outliers. Why am I calling it Outliers? Because there's people that have a surprising amount of something, and rather than because they're statistically abnormal, because they're different than other people in some way, in this case through being more successful than expected or more healthy than expected, instead of throwing out that data, he's saying, let's pay attention to that. Let's really zoom in on those cases and see what we can learn. How is it that they were able to have such success? That's why he calls the book Outliers. He calls it the story of success, but it's really about the story of social success. All right, so let's keep going. Next, he introduces the idea of a Matthew effect. This is an incredibly simple but powerful concept. And so, again, what this is doing is pushing us to expand our understanding of success. The standard view of success in the United States is very much focused on the individual. If we want to understand what makes someone successful, the standard traditional answer is hard work, dedication, and talent. If you read any profile about an athlete, a successful athlete, those are the things that we focus on. They worked harder than anyone else. They had more talent than anyone else. They were gifted in particular ways. They were obsessed in certain ways, right? Why did that business person get so successful? Well, it's about their acumen. It's about their skill. It's about being more clever than everyone else. And we're so obsessed with this, and Gladwell makes this point, that we can even hear examples of people who clearly have some advantages, and yet they'll say they lifted themselves up by their bootstraps, that they're responsible for their own success. You have Jeb Bush running for president. He ran against Donald Trump when Donald Trump was running to be the Republican nominee, and then Donald Trump went on to beat Hillary Clinton and become president. When Jeb Bush was running against Donald Trump, Jeb Bush is the son of an American president, George Bush. His brother was already a 2-term president of the United States, and yet you could have Jeb Bush saying, "Hey, I'm self-made. I'm like you. I'm getting here because of hard work and dedication and talent and commitment." Right? And we take that, and people cheer during that moment. And this is not to say that those with some sort of advantage should not be able to seek advantage, but we can look at this and still hold on to an individual understanding of success. It's so dominant in our mind that we often look past examples or data that suggests otherwise. In a sense, if you think about this, and here's a little chart that's talking about, well, what makes a tree grow? If you think about what makes a tree successful, it's not just the seed. It's not just the quality of the tree that it comes from, but it's, do you have access to water? What type of organic matter is in the soil? Is there sunlight? Is there a forest fire that burns the whole area down? Are there horses that come along and either kill you or maybe they provide fertilizer? How much rain is there? And if we think about what we read earlier in the semester, what is this underground cycle of roots? What are all these different connections? What type of carbon is available? All this type of stuff. Or another way to think about this is pushing us to use our sociological imagination. Don't just focus on the individual and how they have success. Focus on all those factors that affect people and allow them to have success or not have success. So he starts off with the example of Canadian hockey, and he uses a few sport examples. I won't go into a lot of detail here because you can read the chapter, but the key thing is, in this example, sport is useful because in sport, it's very easy to tell who is successful and who isn't successful. When you're looking at swimming, which you would do in the mundanity of excellence, the faster swimmer is more successful. When you look at hockey, well, it's the team that has more goals, and even though it's a team sport, the question is, well, who's contributing? Who's making defensive stops? Who's putting the puck in the net? Sorry, I don't actually watch much hockey, so I apologize to the hockey fans and players out there if that's not the terminology that will be used. But when we try to think about what makes someone successful or not successful, sport is probably the easiest place to determine that. Is that basketball player scoring points? Are they stopping the person that they're defending from scoring points? Is that person who jumping high? Is that person who shoots a bow and arrow hitting the target, right? Success is more clear than in other places. And you have the fascinating example of hockey because, and I'm going to let you read the details of it, but there's this mystery, because again, that's what Gladwell loves, about why is it that players who are born earlier in the calendar year are dominating hockey. And so I'll let you look for those answers. I want you to understand that on your own. So pay attention to that in this chapter. Now, the details, that's up to you, but the answer is going to be related to this idea of the Matthew effect. So make sure you read the hockey example. I think it's such a classic and fascinating example. But the Matthew effect is initially thought of when studying education and reading. So it applies to sports and hockey, but this is initially an idea that's associated with education and reading. It was first created by a psychologist whose name, I believe, was either Keith or Kevin Stanovic. One of those two. It's last name Stanovic. And it's to describe this phenomena where when new readers acquire the skills to read, their early success in acquiring reading skills leads to greater later success. And as they achieve greater later success, you actually see more of a gap between them and those who started with lower level skills, right? So this is the group that had success early on, and you see it exponentially grow, and you see the group who struggled early on, and they're not able to build without those foundational skills. And there's a lot of reasons that happens. One of them could be if a teacher sees you and you have aptitude for something, they're more likely to encourage you. That's a big factor. The other thing that happens is what we call the labeling effect. You get labeled as a good student or a bad student, and then you start to internalize and believe it. And then you could also think about just the emotional connection to the activity. If you are struggling with readings and you get assigned a book, you're constantly learning that you're not living up to expectations or that you're struggling, and it can even become a source of fear and anxiety. Versus the person who enjoys it because they just have that little bit of advantage, and then they're given the book, it's actually fun to read or it's okay to read, they get positive reinforcement, they want to read more, and those skills keep building and goes upward and upward and upward, right? This is the Matthew effect. The term, so you have Kevin Stanovic talks about it, and then Robert K. Merton, a sociologist, talks about how this extends beyond just reading or math. It's this repeated thing we see in society where he calls it a cumulative advantage. So you have some advantage and then you accumulate or build more advantages on top of it. Another way to think about it would be success leads to more success. Or another way to think about it would be something like the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And you can see this in all these different cases. This is a chart which you're not able to see. And the reason you're not able to see is because there's so many examples on the chart. This is the Wikipedia list, and you can look it up yourself. This is the Wikipedia list of second-generation players in the NBA. Only the NBA. We're only talking about the NBA, the National Basketball Association. These are NBA players whose parents were also in the NBA. This is not even including NBA players whose parents played at the college level or played in other pro basketball leagues. What is this showing? This is an example of how success leads to more success, right? You have some sort of genetic advantage. Beyond that, you have some sort of monetary advantage. You have some sort of advantage in being taught the right techniques of how to shoot and dribble and play defense and pass at a young age. All those skills lead to new skills. Because of those early skills, you're able to get really good coaches. You're able to get a strength and conditioning coach at a young age. You have good nutrition. You're able to get on a good traveling team. Scouts are interested in you because the name on the back of your jersey. You get positive reinforcement, right? All that success leads to more success. There's a lot of pro and college athletes whose parents were also successful athletes. It's not just because of the genetic advantage. It's probably part of it, but that's not the only thing that's happening. This can also apply to other spaces, other types of spaces within education. This picture in front of you is the Salisbury School. This costs almost $70,000 a year to go. It is a preparatory school, meaning people from 7th grade, 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th grade, and 12th grade will go to this school and they will pay almost $70,000 a year for their middle and high school education. Why do you do that? Well, because the Matthew effect. Parents are not sending kids to these schools simply because they want them to have a good high school education. They're sending them to these schools because they know the skills they acquire, the network they become part of, and the name that gets attached to them will help them as they go on to the next step. A cumulative advantage. Success begets success. You have this name attached to you, you're likely to get into an elite private school. You get into the elite private school, that can help you when you get your job, right? All these things we see this, right? This is the Matthew effect. And again, you could look at this in lots of different places. What websites generate traffic? Well, the search engines find websites that already have traffic. Success begets success. All of these are examples of the Matthew effect. We could choose any of them. Brain drain. Where do people choose to live when they're successful and high achieving in college and at the top of their field? Well, they're going to move to cities that are already desirable. Or the term brain drain was referred to all the people who were finding success and highly educated, whether it was in China or India or South Korea or a number of countries in Eastern Europe. And what would happen in these countries, or like Colombia and Ecuador, and a number of countries in South America, you would see people who were very successful and showed signs of being able to build a name within a certain field, whether it's the sciences or business or mathematics or talented writers, skilled poets, any type of field. And what would happen? Well, with that success, they would say, well, I should go off to the best university in the United States and maybe in England, and I should get a job in those places. So brain drain is literally, here's these brains that were developed and flourished in our country, and as soon as they have success, they leave, and where do they go? To countries that already have a lot of talented people, right? Already have companies that are successful because those are where the good jobs are and those are where the good opportunities are. This is called brain drain. You could think about restaurants, and like, again, any of these, but thinking about restaurants, the first review matters so incredibly much, because what happens when you go into a city? You look on your phone and you say, I'm interested in having Mexican food tonight, or I'm interested in having Italian or Thai food, or eating at a good Chinese restaurant, or I'm looking for what's the best Indian food in the area. And the reviews that pop up, you say, okay, this one has a positive review, and even more importantly, if it has multiple reviews, you're going to go to it, and you'll have a good experience, and then you'll write another positive review. And they'll have more money, so they'll be able to invest in the restaurant. That first 2 weeks of a restaurant is so important because those early reviews, the early success or lack of success looks like this. Because if you're not doing well, then you have to start cutting corners. Maybe you have to use cheaper ingredients. Maybe you have to fire one of the chefs or one of the servers. Then people come in and they have a worse experience, right? So in all these ways, we see the Matthew effect, success leading to more success. It doesn't mean it's impossible to make this jump. The hockey example, what you're going to read about, it is possible to make that jump from this line to this line. It's possible in 8th grade to discover your joy of reading, or in college to discover your joy of reading and invest in it and commit to it and start to catch up, right? Those things are possible. These are the general trend lines we see in society. Now, this raises a fundamental question, because what are the goals of education or development system for sports? I would argue is if the goal is to maximize the potential for all, it seems that we're failing. Instead, we're often maximizing the potential for people who show early signs of aptitude and if you want to know who shows early signs of aptitude, it's often people who have that solid foundation, whether it's their family, whether it's economic security, whether it's being raised in a supportive community, those are the people that often show that initial aptitude. And then we build a system that often rewards that. This is what we see in the sports example. If we're looking to maximize, which Canada is, Canada wants to have the best hockey players around. Well, they're only doing a good job with people who are born between January and May, January and June, right? So you're losing half of the potential talent. And we see that happening in education system as well, or sporting system in the United States. We see this happen in many different cases. So it raises questions. They're difficult questions. There's not always an easy solution. But key takeaways from this lecture, thinking about how he's trying to come up with a social understanding of different factors that can lead to someone being successful or not successful. And then the Matthew effect is one example, one of the ideas that you'll apply. And on that quiz that you have to take on success, definitely know this slide. This will be one of the questions. Hopefully that made sense. As always, email me if you have any questions at all.